This episode is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the #1 seller of games and gaming accessories. And GatheringMagic.com, the #1 resource for Magic the Gathering news and articles.
Alright, so I wanted to make this video sort of as a follow-up to last week and as a deck tech. Last week I talked about aggression and how aggression is central to understanding the game or any format as a whole. I wanted to sort of provide a practical example of how you utilize knowledge about aggression in other ways other than to just attack. One of the things that I talked about last week was that in order to defend properly, you have to know how to attack properly. And that is something that I focused on since then and gained sort of a better knowledge of the format and how to attack properly, and thus came up with the list that you see here. What you see here is American Control, only it's my take on American Control. A lot of people right now are running like Entreat the Angels and stuff like that, and I just don't think that that's the right direction to go because it doesn't fulfill Control's primary function, which is to defend you as the player. Once again, in order to defend yourself as a player, you need to know how opposing decks are planning on attacking you. So, going through the format, I figured that there are a number of decks that we have to worry about, right? There's the various zombie decks. There's some other like mono red or close to mono or red black aggro decks. There's like Naya, sort of some of the builds are more controlling, some of the builds are more aggressive. There's green white aggro. There's Jund midrange. These are, I think, the big decks. Like Fright is also sort of a deck, and American Control is also sort of a deck. But I think the big decks are really the zombies decks, the various green aggro decks, and the green midrange decks, right? So I wanted to play a few of those decks and get a better sense for what those decks were trying to do and how they were accomplishing what they were trying to do. And so I did. A lot of the impetus for this stemmed from just wanting to understand the format better and wanting to sort of just get better at Magic as a whole. The impetus to develop this specific list came from Shaheen Saruni, who on Thursday or Friday, I don't remember, posted a Lingering Souls Esper control list. For a very long time, I've liked Lingering Souls and I've wanted to create an Esper control list with Lingering Souls, and I just could never really successfully accomplish it. It just always had holes that I didn't like. So when I saw Shaheen's list, I went to play it, obviously, because I was like, well, Esper Lingering Souls control, this looks like something that I'd be interested in trying. And in playing his deck, I discovered that there were still holes in it that I didn't like. There were less than the list that I had created. It was more refined. But there were still holes that I wasn't happy with. So actually, eventually, the next build that I tried was American splashing black with Lingering Souls. And even that I wasn't real happy with because the mana base was not quite there. It's almost there, but it wasn't quite there. And so I went back to the drawing board and played some of the green decks and the Rakdos aggro decks some more, trying to sort of maybe get some ideas for what to do against the format, and eventually came up with an answer. I think this list itself is pretty good. I wouldn't really touch the main deck. The sideboard I have not much idea what I want to do in the sideboard. I think part of the issue is that the main deck is in fact quite good. So the sideboard in of itself is minor optimization stuff that I just haven't played enough games to know where certain cards are bad and where certain cards are slightly better than other cards. I would say that no card in this main deck is bad in most matchups. It's every card in this main deck is good in some way in every single matchup where I care about it. And the question is, I'm running slight optimizations out of the board. But that's a tangent. Let's go back and focus on how this format attacks you and how this deck specifically deals with the various threats that the format presents. So I want to take a look at the 3 primary threats in this format, and I've sort of moved them over here. So the first threat I'm going to highlight is Arbor Elf. Arbor Elf itself represents a strategic attack that is utilized by a lot of the more aggressive green decks. Their plan is to use small utility creatures or mana accelerators. In this case, Arbor Elf, Avacyn's Pilgrim, and Thalia, Guardian of Thraben are the 3 primary ones, although you'll also see Silverblade Paladin, and you'll see some of the other ones, maybe like 2/2 Selesnya Charm token, or Watchwolf, or the Watchwolf, whatever it is, the sorcery speed Watchwolf. You sometimes see like Loxodon Smiter. You'll see, maybe you'll see some Lotleth Troll as well. And just like these aggressive green decks, the entire purpose is to use small creatures to apply pressure and then to finish you off with larger creatures. Green-white and Naya are the 2 big versions of that. So I'm not too much concerned about the black versions that I did play against once or twice with like Lotleth Troll and whatnot, like whatever. But the main threat here is in fact actually the mana acceleration provided by Arbor Elf and Avacyn's Pilgrim alongside Thalia. Those 3 cards, Arbor Elf, Avacyn's Pilgrim, and Thalia, form the core early game of the threat, and they allow the Naya deck or the green-white deck to establish a time advantage over the opponent. Thalia slows down the opponent's answers, while Arbor Elf and Avacyn's Pilgrim accelerate the green-white or the Naya deck to the point where it's playing out threats faster than the opposing deck can deal with them. So we have the big threat here, which is represented by Arbor Elf. So that's one angle of attack. Let's move on to the next angle of attack. Talk about Gravecrawler. Gravecrawler is obviously representative of the various Rakdos aggro decks and zombies. So what these decks are able to do is these decks are able to put on a lot of pressure real quickly because they have 12 2-power 1-drops, sometimes even 16 if you're willing to play Stromkirk Noble. It's a lot of pressure very, very quickly. The longevity of the deck stems from this specific card, Geralf's Messenger, and Blood Artist. Those 3 cards allow the deck to sort of have a medium to long game that allows them to finish off the opponent after they deal a bunch of damage with their 1,000,000 2-power 1-drops. So that's what this threat represents, is just lots of 1 mana 2-power creatures in combination with a solid long game provided by Falconwrath Aristocrat, Geralf's Messenger, Hellrider, Blood Artist, like just these cards that provide this sort of medium to long game that allow you to finish off an opponent after you do a bunch of damage with 2-power 1-drops. So that's the threat Gravecrawler represents. And I want to talk last but not least about Farseek. Farseek is for the more controlling mid-range decks. So mid-range control decks that are like Jund mid-range, or even some of the Naya or Bant lists. What these decks are seeking to do is these decks are seeking to ramp out Huntmaster, Thragtusk, Armada Worm, Angel of Serenity, Wolfhear Silverheart. These decks are planning on playing these cards faster. And the decks are constructed in such a way that they take advantage of Farseek jumping straight to 4, or maybe sometimes a Rakdos key rune, or a Selesnya key rune, or whatever. One of the key runes jumping them to 5. So this mana acceleration jumping into its actual threats is crucial. Most of these decks are very threat light under 4 mana. Most of their 3 mana or under cards are going to be defensive spells. Their 4 mana and above cards are where you're going to find the threats. You're going to find Planeswalkers, you're going to find threatening creatures, and you're going to find spells like Rakdos' Return that allow them to sort of put a lot of pressure on their opponents. what I found playing those decks is that draws where you didn't have a Farseek or a Key Rune were significantly worse because you were so much slower. So the decks really are threatening you with Farseek and not with the threats in and of themselves at the top end. Sure, Thragtusk, Rakdos' Return, not Key Rune. Rakdos' Return, Thragtusk, Huntmaster of the Fells, Restoration Angel, Armada Worm. These are all real good cards. And they're good in any situation, but they're particularly good when they come down long before they should. And so that's what the threat of Farseek represents. So the question is, how do you handle all three angles of attack while not losing too much percentage against any of them? And so the key card for handling this is going to be Izzet Charm. The reason being is that on the play, Izzet Charm allows you to stop Farseek, and that is the real big benefit of playing Izzet Charm. There's no way of stopping Farseek if you're on the draw. So if they have a turn 2 Farseek and you're on the draw, you're just flat out of luck. There's nothing you can do about it. But on the play, you can focus on being able to stop this. Izzet Charm is good because it allows you to stop the Farseek on the play, and it also deals with this angle of attack and this angle of attack by being a 2 damage spell. It's a shock, basically. Sure, paying 2 for your shock is a little expensive, but having it have the added flexibility of being able to deal with a Farseek is in fact really critical. If playing this list, one thing you should do if your opponent casts turn 2 Farseek and you can counter it, always counter it. Every single time. It doesn't matter what the rest of your hand is, counter the turn 2 Farseek. It's worth far more to you than whatever counterspell you're using. So Izzet Charm is once again the center of how this deck is going to be able to handle all three angles of attack. So let's go over and let's take a look at how each of these cards plays into the defensive role, and then how some of these cards substitute as offensive cards as well. So, Syncopate. Syncopate is my concession to sort of needing counter magic that can deal with the end game of the aggressive decks while also dealing with Farseek. The endgame of the aggressive decks, of the Gravecrawler decks, it's the Falcon Wrath Aristocrat or whatever. Okay, so I need to go do something else, and I will pause the recording, and it will be right back, and I will continue. Okay, so we're back. So anyway, moving on to this engine right here. The Pillar of Flame Snapcaster Mage Augur of Bolas engine is centered on dealing with Gravecrawler and Arbor Elf as threats. Small utility creatures and whatnot and small aggressive creatures are basically torn apart by this engine. It's really strong. The fourth Augur of Bolas, there just wasn't any room for it, and the reason it's 4 Snapcaster Mage and 3 Augur of Bolas instead of the other way around is because Snapcaster Mage doubles as stuff against the Farseek decks. It can double up Syncopates, it can double up Mizzium Mortars, it can double up Wraths, it can double up Thoughtflares that allow you to sort of better control the long game against the Farseek decks. And so that's why it's 4 Snaps and 3 Augurs instead of vice versa. Pillar of Flame's actually okay against those decks, specifically against the Huntmaster decks, because you can actually take out both halves of a Huntmaster with a Pillar and a Snapcaster, which is sort of nice. So that's what this is there for. Once again, so now we have talked about Izzet Charm, we've talked a little bit about Syncopate, and how Syncopate is sort of operates as a catch-all against all of this stuff. And then we have gone over this engine and how this engine is really strong here. So I want to talk a little bit about this set of cards. The Detention Spheres, the Dissipates, and the Mizzium Mortars. They function as sort of catch-all glue cards. None of them are optimal against all of these decks, but they serve sort of a necessary function. Sorry, excuse me. The Mizzium Mortars serve as bonus removal spells against these two decks, the Arbor Elf and Gravecrawler decks, and sort of allow you to kill bigger creatures against the Farseek decks. The Dissipates serve as a catch-all to late-game burn spells from these guys, bigger creatures from these guys, so the Armada Worms, the Wolfear Silverhearts of the deck, and serves against to stop the Planeswalkers and Rakdos' return and stuff like that come out of the Farseek decks. And ditto with Detention Sphere, sort of serves as a catch-all answer that allows you to hit just about everything. So that's what these cards are sort of there for. And having catch-all answers is important because what'll happen is sometimes we'll just draw the wrong card for the wrong situation, and so the catch-all answer will sort of allow you to deploy your other resources a little bit more effectively because you can use the catch-all answer instead of the answer that you actually want. I want to talk a little bit about Supreme Verdict versus Terminus. The big issue with this format is going to be twofold. First is speed. Terminus at 6 mana is slow particularly against these decks. But even against the Arbor Elf decks, Terminus at 6 mana can be slow, and there's no real way to control the miracle. So you run into this awkward situation where a lot of times you gotta tap out to pay 6 mana for Terminus, and then your opponent, like your green opponent, just plays a Thragtusk, or your red-black opponent just plays a Falconwrath Aristocrat, and you're all of a sudden like not in really that much better shape than you were before you Terminused, and just things go badly. I've ended up discovering that Supreme Verdict is in fact just a little bit more consistent. It deals with slightly less stuff than Terminus, like it doesn't actually deal with Gravecrawlers. It allows Geralf's Messengers to come back. It doesn't deal with Stranglerootgeist for those people who are still running it, although there aren't that many. But for the most part, I find that Supreme Verdict is okay. It solves enough problems that it's worth playing. And the other thing it allows you to do is it allows you to leave up Dissipate, Syncopate, and Izzet Charm in the sort of later stages of the game, where you're only spending 4 mana, and then you can leave up like 3 for Dissipate, or 2 for Izzet Charm, or like, maybe 3 or 4 mana for Syncopate to sort of screw with their spellcasting a little bit. You're not always going to obviously get to counter a spell if you leave up Syncopate or Supreme Verdict, but often what you can do is you can stop them from casting 2 spells and only have to deal with 1. And if you have something like Snapcaster plus Pillar of Flame, or Mizzium Mortars, or even like a Detention Sphere, sometimes that'll allow you to deal with the other spell cost efficiently and get back to the point where you're sitting back on instant speed stuff and just in general controlling the flow of the game. So now we move on to Tamiyo and Jace. Tamiyo is real good at handling single target creatures. He actually, I think Tamiyo, I don't know. I'm always confused as to the gender of Tamiyo. So Tamiyo is real good at handling Thragtusk in particular. Tapping down Thragtusk often just shuts it down and lets you find time to answer it sort of at your leisure. Jace is real solid against the Arbor Elf and Gravecrawler decks, primarily against the Gravecrawler decks. Against the Arbor Elf decks, he can be good, but a lot of times, like if they have a Silverblade Paladin or a Wolfear Silverheart, they're just swinging for so much damage that the Jace doesn't really matter that much. It helps, but it's not like the end-all be-all. Against the Gravecrawler decks, though, he's nuts. He's also solid against Huntmaster, making Huntmaster only swing for 2 instead of 4. And sometimes he'll draw the 2 damage of the Huntmaster trigger fire as well, which is important. But these, in addition to being sort of okay defensive cards, actually the Planeswalkers are your primary offensive threats. You're going to win the vast majority of your games through either Jace's ultimate, finding one of their big dudes and casting it and killing them with their own dude, or Tamiyo's ultimate and just killing them with Pillar of Flame. I win many, many games with just Tamiyo ultimate, kill them with Pillar of Flame, or they just scoop knowing that I have like Dissipate and Supreme Verdict, or like Syncopate and Mizzium Mortars in my hand, to the point where they're not going to be able to actually do anything productive, and so it doesn't matter really what I find. Eventually, I'm going to kill them. So the Planeswalkers are your primary offensive threats. The other thing that you're doing is you're generating card advantage because you're playing a Weissman strategy. And so these 3 cards are designed to be your sort of card advantage cards. 2 Thoughtflares. I found the Thoughtflare to be the best card for this because it actually nets you a card, first of all. Secondly, it allows you to filter your draws, which is in and of itself card advantage, allowing you to pitch extra lands, or cards you don't need in that situation, like Pillar of Flame. Often is not that great late game, so you can just pitch it. And it allows you to just basically hit in the right spot on the curve. Because you're going to spend your first 6 turns or so playing these spells primarily. And then you're going to get, into situations where you need to still play these spells, but then you need to start playing these spells as well. And so Thoughtflare, being instant speed, allows you the flexibility to deploy stuff like Dissipate, Syncopate, and Izzet Charm, while also leaving the mana open to draw a bunch of cards if necessary. And I find that function is in fact really good. Sphinx's Revelation is just sort of an endgame finisher, in the sense that casting it for any sort of decent number will generally induce a scoop, but it will gain you life to push you out of burn range, and it will also give you the cards to find a Jace or a Tamiyo to allow you to finish off your opponent. The only actual real dedicated win condition in the deck is this Hellion Crucible. It's in here because oftentimes you just need a way to win the game, and just making a 4/4 is good enough. I find that it adds an interesting angle of attack. I don't actually think that it's stronger than the Lighthouse. I do think it's more interesting. So if you want to play a second Lighthouse, there's no reason you can't. I do think that 1 Hellion Crucible is correct, so I wouldn't play 2. So if you're going to play it, I would play 1/1. Otherwise, you can just play 2 Lighthouse, and that's perfectly fine. I have seen no problems with that. One of the key features you can see about this deck is that literally the entire deck is dedicated to be defensive. I don't dedicate any slots to actually winning the game because you don't need to. When you're defending yourself, the concept of Defender's Advantage in Magic allows you to build advantage through defense. So if you just simply defend well enough, you'll reach a position in which as long as the cards you have the ability to win the game, they will win you the game. And that's what I'm talking about, is that Jace and Tamiyo are great examples of this because they'll defend you, but then at some point in time, you need cards that have the ability to win the game. They don't need to win the game by themselves. They just need to have the ability to win the game. And Tamiyo and Jace definitely have the ability to win the game with their ultimates. And so that's where that comes from. The creatures here also sort of... I've never actually won a game with Snapcaster Mage Beatdown yet, but I'm sure it will happen at some point. It just, at some point in time, you once again need the ability to win the game. And these creatures have the ability to win the game. The Hellion Crucible is, once again, like I said, the only true dedicated win condition. It's in there because sometimes you want an alternate way of win the game, and it is there because I have the space in the mana base. The mana base can handle the Hellion Crucible, so it's there. You don't have to run it. You can run more lands. You can run a second loot house, whatever. It's not necessary. It's good, though, if you are a slower player and therefore need to close out games quicker. It will definitely help you do that. So this deck is pretty strong in the sense that what it allows you to do is it allows you to take the primary threats presented by the format, represented by Arbor Elf, Gravecrawler, and Farseek, and answer them in sort of an effective manner from a variety of angles. Izzet Charm and Syncopate are key to this because they allow you the flexibility to sort of deploy your other resources, these resources, in a manner that most effectively utilizes your central resources, which are these resources, and then you fill in the gaps with things like Izzet Charm, Detention Spheres, Dissipates, Mizzium Mortars, and then you deploy your pillars, Supreme Verdicts, Jaces, and card advantage where it's best. So this is sort of a case study in how you take the ideas of a format, the threats of a format, and create a defensive card suite that allows you to defend against those cards. Understanding aggression and the angles of attack allows you to do something like this. Now, you're going to ask me about a sideboard. I will tell you right now that I don't really have a good sideboard for this deck. I know certain cards that I want, but for the most part, the sideboard is in a state of flux. So I'll show you what I have right now, and I'll talk about what I know. But the sideboard is definitely a huge work in progress, so you should play it and determine the sideboard for yourself. So what I have here is the sideboard. The cards that I know I want are these cards over here. I'm going to move them to the side. So these 9 cards, the 3 Negates, the 3 Elixirs of Immortality, 2 Mizzium Mortars, and a Supreme Verdict, are the cards that I'm fairly certain end up in the final sideboard. They allow you the flexibility to alter your deck composition against these 3 threats in such a way that maximizes your efficiency. Elixirs are real good against the Gravecrawler deck specifically. Supreme Verdict and Mizzium Mortars are strong against both of these decks, and Negate is good against this deck. I will bring in Negates against Gravecrawler and Arbor Elf occasionally as well, because sometimes it's just better than Syncopate. A lot of times you'll notice that you're not catching early creatures with these. The primary purpose of Syncopate is to stop late game burn or reach, stuff like that. If that's what you're doing with Syncopate, Negate's often a better choice. Sometimes you'll do the same thing with Izzet Charm as well. You can board out Izzet Charms for Negates, but I like to leave in Izzet Charms in most matchups. So these are the cards that I feel like you sort of should start with. And then everything over here is just random musings for things that I think I might be useful. This is the new version that I just came up with. There's a previous version that has 5 different cards in this slot, or that's 6 different cards in this slot. So it's whatever you want. I think that an extra land might be useful in the Control Mirror. Ditto with the 4th Jace and the 3rd Sphinx's Revelation. Detention Sphere serves as sort of a catch-all that's reasonable. And, you know, there's a good amount of graveyard interaction in this format, so maybe I want a couple Rest in Peace lying around. I haven't really had the opportunity to really use Rest in Peace that much. I don't really think it's a huge deal, but, you know, c'est la vie. So that's really just a quick overview of the sideboard. I've said, you know, that you should focus on these 9 cards and do whatever you want with these 6 cards. Whatever your local metagame dictates, whatever you think is stronger. But I do think that, as a whole, this is a solid control deck, and if you're looking for something slower, American, you like this sort of deck, I would think you would be well advised to try it. I think you'll find that the strengths of this deck lie in its ability to respond to the threats that the format presents in an efficient, unique manner, and it doesn't really just get tied down doing stuff like Terminus and Entreat the Angels. There's nothing wrong with those cards, but once again, when your primary purpose is to defend yourself, you know, why don't you defend yourself? I will say, for control decks, I think this card is criminally underplayed. It's really, really good. Anyway, so that's my video for this week. I hope that it was a good case study in how you utilize the knowledge of aggression and the ideas of my last article in a practical manner to come up with something unique and different. So I'll see you guys next week, and, you know, I hope you enjoyed this video.